Okay, so this lecture is going to be quite short. These lecture slides are quite few. We are really going to focus on two main things. The stakeholders and just to introduce to you a tool on how you can analyze your stakeholders during the design process. Essentially, when we began, I remember when we had our introductory lecture, we looked at several things, what systems were, what information systems are. And one of the things we talked about were the human element. The human element is extremely important to ICT, to the success of ICT. Most of the time, ICT people like to focus on the functionality and forget the human element. But these are the most important part because these make or break it. So today we just want to focus on the stakeholders and how we can identify who are they, and then how can we identify them and all the things concerning them. So this particular lecture is going to look at distributed ownership. A system is owned by someone. It is not because the owners basically are done to ensure that it is supported, that it's actually operated, that the processes are going on. So we want to see who actually owns it, who will accept to take up ownership. So the objectives for this course unit, we are best, in short, as I'd stated, we are going to look at the stakeholders, those people who play a part in systems, in ICT systems, and basically who are going to own the system, who own the organization, the processes, who's going to carry out the processes. We want to understand who those stakeholders are and how can we identify them. So in the identification process, this is when we are going to look at the tool that we are going to use. Now, if you go to Moodle, you'll find these slides, but you'll also find an article that gives a bit more explanation on the tool that is used to identify and analyze our stakeholders. So first, let's begin by understanding who a stakeholder is. Now, in simple terms, in very simple terms, it is somebody who holds an interest, who has an interest in the performance of the implementation, in the performance of something. If you look at anything, for example, if we come to your, all of you have homes. Every single human being belongs to a family. Within a family, all members are stakeholders, from the parents to the children to the workers, to the workers within the family, those who support the family, either working as a maid or somebody who's working on the gate as their askari, whatever it is. All these people are stakeholders. They have an interest. The interests differ. You may find the mother in the household is interested in the cleanliness in the home. The father may be interested in academic performance. Whatever it is, everybody has an interest. So when you transfer that same ideology to an organization, you have stakeholders, and there is the stakeholders have different positions. Now, the stakeholders within an organization can be both external and internal. External meaning that they're outside of the organization, internal, they are part of the organization. Sometimes you may find a stakeholder who holds both positions. They're both on the outside and they're both on the inside. But most of the time we categorize them as internal and external. So examples of these could be the owners, the actors, those who are within the organization, an external agent. We're going to discuss this in detail. So in this slide, we see a detailed categorization of stakeholders, what we would normally see in any organization. In the first four that we see here, we have our internal stakeholders. We have the owners of an organization, the shareholders, the managers, staff, and employees. We shall see these in detail one by one. Then you have the external, where you have the customers, the suppliers, the community, and government. Now you may say government, how? Usually government, remember when we looked at strategy, we talked about the external environment and how the external environment comes into affect strategy. How? The law, for example, an existing law will affect the way an organization operates. You saw the directives of the president once COVID-19 hit, everything stops, and that automatically affects any organization. So government is an external stakeholder. So let's look at this in detail. Let's look at each of these stakeholders. This particular slide simply emphasizes those that we have internal and external stakeholders. We can have this discussion later, but let's look at each stakeholder. Let's look at the owners and shareholders. So essentially, when we look at owners and shareholders, we are looking at those who are responsible for the smooth running of the organization. So just look at the example of Umu. Umu is owned by the bishops. So essentially, the bishops are responsible for that. Although you may find them, they are really quite silent. They may be represented by the board of the governing board, who as and essentially they have a say on who should be on the governing board. So that is how they take responsibility for that. So they are also legally responsible for the organization. So in case your management team does anything shoddy, the owners are answerable. In other situations, you find the owners are the shareholders. Now, in a small organization, you may find one shareholder, but in larger organizations, you find quite a number of them. And these, normally the board of directors answers to them, or the board of directors reports to the shareholders. So essentially, these bring in the cash. They are responsible for bringing in the cash of the organization. Then you have your managers. So these are the decision makers, and they are accountable to the owners. So these are responsible for planning and control. Then you have employees and staff. So if you can just have a quick look on Google, it can show you just a quick distinction what an employee is and what a staff member is. At UMU, most of us are referred to as staff. The reason being we have contracts. So basically, you're given a 3-year contract, which can may be renewed or they may not be. So that's why we are considered as staff. An employee is different to receive a salary, although essentially we all do receive a wage. But I think that's the distinction, the fact that you have a contract that is renewable. Then we have our customers. Now at UMU, you students are our customers. You are receiving a service from UMU. So the customers are those who essentially buy your goods. Now, when you look at each of these, even up to this point, you see each of these people have a stake in your system. Yeah, each of them have a stake in your system, in a system that is implemented. Then you have your suppliers. So these basically provide resources, much needed resources for your goods and services, for you to be able to provide your goods and services. So essentially, it is important that any organization has a really good working relationship with their suppliers. So one of those, and if you're looking at ICT, ICT is supposed to help support that relationship. Finally, you have the community. So it is from the community that you basically get your stakeholders. Your customers come from the community. Your employees and staff may come from the community. So essentially, the community is an extremely important part of your organization. I remember one time my uncle, when we were running, when he started introducing me to the runnings of the organization, And he told me of our tea estate here, and he was telling me that, it's important that you have neighbors and that you have good friends with your neighbors. He said, why? What if the fire breaks out and it begins to torch the tea? It's your neighbors who will be the first people there to take out that fire. So the community is a really important part. Once you aggravate them, they can easily bring down your organization. So the community is also one thing that you must think about when you're thinking of stakeholders. Now, why is it important? Because once you're looking at ICT design, all these stakeholders are essentially going to be part and are going to make or break your implemented system. They will make or break it. So how do we ensure that we have all these stakeholders on the same page with us? So in this, the remaining part of the lecture, which is not going to take long, we are going to look at CATWO. So CATWO is basically a framework which helps us carry out a business analysis of our stakeholders to help us understand, to identify these stakeholders and what is it about them that can make or break our system design, any solution that we wish to implement. So essentially, CATWO is a generic business analytic tool. It was developed by Peter Checkland, and essentially it helps decision makers think about a solution that they wish to implement, to see what needs to be handled. Now, when you look at the framework, the full name of the framework, it helps us identify the different pillars or the different types of stakeholders and where they may affect your system. So we're going to go through each of these at one at a time. The first is our customers or our clients. We've already seen who these are. Our clients are going to be users of the system, either directly or indirectly. Let me just give you a scenario. One thing that has come into mind. If any of you has ever been to Centenary Bank, Centenary Bank has quite when you look at most banks usually have you would have, let's say, if you took a cross section a research or analysis of their customers, you can get, should I say, a profile of the customers they have. So Centenary Bank is one of those banks that has a cross section of the entire Ugandan society. You have different kinds of customers that are part of Centenary Bank. Now, I have visited Centenary Bank. I have visited Stanbic Bank. The category of usually customers, their clients, is quite different. Stanbic Bank is very corporate. When you go there, it's quite rare to find, let us say, like here in Fort Portal, when I go to Stanbic Bank, most of their customers can speak English they are probably have a certain level of education. Now, when you come to Centenary Bank, it's not the same. When you go to Centenary Bank, they have that small gadget at the entrance, which helps to generate for you a ticket, which tells you, which organizes those who can get to the teller services. Now, for 2 days in a row, when I've gone to Centenary Bank, I usually find somebody who cannot use that small machine very well here in Fort Portal. And usually I've met so far 2 ladies, and they've asked me, please help me print out a card for me. The person really doesn't know how to use it. But when Centenary Bank implemented the system, I'm sure they knew that these were also going to be users of that system, because you need that ticket to access any kind of service within the bank. And this is the use of the system. So I'm sure that is why they put it right next to a customer care lady who can easily get up and give support. And in other situations, another customer can help. But this is also part of the system. So now it's also important you understand who your customers are. It's important to understand that will they be able to use the system? How effectively can they use it? How deep? Now, for example, that teller service, it's quite small. It requires only a few steps. So you yourself as ICT need to analyze how much in depth, how much computer literacy levels do my users need to have to use this system. At any point, will this system discourage a user from even attempting to use the system? Once it discourages, that means it's basically discouraging the customer from using the services. So the first part you begin with is asking those questions. Now here there are some sample questions which you can start asking. Who is on the receiving end? That means you're asking, who is your client? What problem do they have now? Why would they need your system? What would entice them to adopt using your system? How will they react when we are proposing? Is this something that they will shy away? Who are the likely winners and losers? In other words, who will say, I will not use your system? Look at e-learning at UMU or in any university. We definitely lost some students because of e-learning. We definitely lost those students. But also on the other hand, quite a number of universities also lost, even those who refused to go online, lost students after COVID. Some people simply say that they lost their motivation for studying. So there are those questions that need to be asked. Is there a likelihood that you're going to lose some customers because you have adopted a certain system? So this is the part you think about these are some sample questions you can think about. But go ahead and look at the article that I've uploaded as well. We can think of something like this. We can look at Uganda Matters University and the student registration process. If the students have to go registration, they have to register themselves at the beginning of every semester. If you think about how UMU carries out the current registration system, how comfortable are you with carrying out that process? For you as a student, what part makes you wish you are not using this particular process? So you can think about something like that. The automation process of registration, how helpful has it been? Then you have the actors. That's the other part of the framework, the actors. So who exactly are the actors? These are the people who are going to carry out the implementation changes. So the actors are those who will carry out the doing. These would include, number one, management. Number two, it would include those who, the employees, and so on and so forth, the ICT department. Now, if you look at, again, the example of the student registration process, who are the actors there? You have the registrar, the academic registrar. So there you have the registry department. You also have then the Office of Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic Affairs. You have the faculty administrators. Then you have the ICT department. Then you have the students are another part. But these are the actors. Now the question you'd ask them, what would be the likely impact of this change? How might they react? Could people lose their jobs? Would they need to acquire more skills? Are there any fears that they have that they may attach to the system? These would be the questions that you would ask. Transformation. This is the T part, transformation. You would need to look at the changes that the system brings about. What changes would it bring about in terms of the business processes, in terms of data? Are we going to store our data in a different way? Is it going to transform the type of data that we have? Are we going to need some new data added on? Are we going to let go of some? And so on and so forth. What transformations are going to happen in terms of input and output? What are the inputs? Where do they come from? And so on and so forth. So if you are coming from a manual system and you're automating, you're going to ask yourself what needs to change. If using the manual system, for example, in registration, before you are collecting a passport size photos hard copy, now you're going to require soft copy. What will that require in terms of storage? What will that demand from the user? All these questions are asked about the transformation. The next is the world view. And it's translated, I think this is a German word. But the world view essentially demands that we have a big picture where we look at the wider impact of the transformation. What will the wider impact of the transformed processes have? You need to sit back and really focus on the wider impact. Now, when we are doing all this, actually, for me, I can't help but think about a discussion I had with a colleague not too long ago about how ICT is perceived. When we look at all these things that we are now discussing, you see ICT is being transformed. The way people think about ICT is, this colleague of mine, that the reason why I'm thinking about him right now is that at a certain point he was called, he's doing his PhD, and he was in a department where he was literally being asked to do data entry. And his supervisor asked him, when she called him and asked him, what are you doing? And she explained. Then she told him, I want you to make a decision now. Are you tired of being a data entrant? Basically, she was asking him, is this what you studied for? You can see now as ICT, you're really rising above that. Yeah. Where you're becoming a strategic leader. That's essentially what you're becoming. If you're going to look at what will this system do, we're not now just talking about its functionality and can it, I want it to do this, I want my printer to do this. No. If I implement this solution, what will be the wider impact? So here in the world view, you're basically seeing what will be the positive and the negative impact of this implemented solution. This is what you're thinking about. And this is the most crucial step of the cat-war analysis, the most crucial step, because it will determine whether this will be a successful implementation or not. So these are just some helpful questions that can guide you as you're looking at the world view. What is the bigger picture into which this situation fits? The bigger picture of the organization, where are we at now? Is this something we really need? If I drop this in there, what big of a splash will it make? And in what direction? Will we be pushing out bad water and making space for good water, or are we pushing out good water and making space for bad water? All those questions are key. You can think about the automation process of the student registration. At UMU, this is something you all participate in as UMU students. You can think about it. does this bring a positive or a negative impact on the UMU registration process? Then we come to the owners, the all part of CATWO. So these are the decisions makers, those who have authority to make the changes. There are those who make authority to either to go ahead with a project or stop it. Can they help you or can they stop you? Now, this is also a key point I want you to note, that ICT is a key part in making a decision on whether to take up a system or not. ICT is a key part. And ICT, what I would advise you as heads of ICT, you must have that authority where you can also make or break. Why? In my experience, systems can be brought over and above the authority of the head of ICT. And later on, they will hang the rope around ICT when that system is failing. So you must have also a key point. And this is where the ICT policy gives you authority. So you must have an ICT policy that gives you that authority. What could cause the owners to get away from the ICT solution? What would lead them to help you? So this is trying to get owners on your side. But essentially, this should originate from ICT. Then we come to the final part of CATWO, which is the E part, the environmental constraints. And this is where government comes in, becomes part and parcel. So when we're looking at the environment, we're looking at the environment in which it's going to come. The first thing is, what are the ethical limitations? You may want to think about some ethical limitations. What are the regulations? Financial constraints. This is the environment, the environmental constraints. These are some of the helpful questions that may lead you to analyze the environment. You can also just think about some of the environmental constraints just from your own examples, from your situations. I would advise that also use CATWO in your analysis of the Aristotle booklets example. We can have a discussion when you have your presentation around this, around the stakeholders. Do we have any question?
No questions, Doctor.
Okay, so we are okay with it?
Yep.
Okay. Essentially, that was our lecture for today. It's quite brief. That's essentially this particular course unit is not a very heavy one. It's light in nature. So it's just to let us understand about stakeholders and how we can begin analysis on them. Have a thought on this with your Aristotle, especially your group assignment. Just have a think on it, and we can have a discussion when you have your presentation.
It is okay, Doctor.
Okay.
Doctor, is this one already on Moodle, or it is session 3? It's part of session 3.
No, it's already on Moodle. It's session 4.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think then I'll leave you for the evening. I'll also upload this one on Moodle, this recorded lecture.
Okay, Doctor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome. Have a good evening.